Welcome everyone. We're here for Obsidian Office Hours. We're on session 12 now, so it's kind of crazy, but been 3 months since kind of started this venture, and it's been a lot of fun getting to stream twice a week and getting to hang out with y'all. The main agenda I had really planned for today was talking about this idea of aliases, which it seems honestly, I think when I first was pitching it to myself, I was thinking like this is kind of a weird thing to focus on because it seems fairly straightforward from like an explanation perspective. But I've been lately thinking about different ideologies regarding aliases and conversations around directories and whether or not they're really, I don't know. So let me see. Can I bring this up? I can. Okay. So the shout out to Cassidy who turned me onto this thread in Twitter in particular. So let me bring this up here. All right, so I'm gonna read it out in case anyone's just listening to the audio, and it's from Galaxy_map. And so it says, as a software developer, I'm finding this fascinating. Apparently, text search has completely replaced hierarchy among younger people as a means of accessing information, and they do not understand the concept of a directory. And so if you're wondering what the context is, this is a retweet from Dr. Savick Ford. And it says that Astro, especially Astro Ed folks, I'm assuming that's short for astrology. But anyways, it's saying, we are finding a persistent issue with getting undergrad and new to research students to understand that a file directory structure exists and how it works. After a debrief meeting today, we realized it's at least partly generational. And I think this has a large implication to this. I'll call it like the new wave of note takers and like graph relationships like Obsidian and Rome and other tools that are thinking about it this way, in that directories, if we think about it, really are an artifact from a time where technology was more limited, where we had to be like, where are we placing this? We're placing it in this one place. And then eventually we had the ability to sort of create shortcuts that we put in multiple places. But then, I mean, to be honest, the searching within an operating system was always a little bit limited based on basically like file name and maybe like some metadata, but don't even talk about like scraping your file content and that kind of stuff. And so it's funny how we've been tied so long to this idea of a directory file structure, yet, you know, computing has gone way past that. And it's why I think for those who have started to invest the time and think about what, you know, software like Obsidian means for note-taking and idea mapping, this is a very fascinating observation. And so the reason this kind of comes to mind for what our work here with Obsidian is because ultimately, one of the challenges I've had with Obsidian, right? I know I'm saying something bad about Obsidian. Well, you know, like, no, I mean, again, everything has its trade-offs. I can't emphasize that enough in basically every single talk and everything I talk about. So with Obsidian, the thing is that every one of your file names are they're actual file names that are created on your computer. And so this sounds like it sounds almost like a pedantic explanation, but it's an important point to drive home because there is an inherent limitation in the fact that every file name is bound by the fact that it's a file name. Because what some may not have realized is that file names are actually limited to a certain set of characters inside of basically there's a legal set of characters. So one example of this is that you can't put question marks in the file titles for the most part. I think there are some exceptions where certain OSs either might permit it and there might be some patches like going forward. But as far as like if you're talking about cross-platform like syncing to Dropbox, there are limitations from if you want to include an emoji, some emojis are supported, some emojis break things. And when you have that kind of limitation, this to me is a drawback because you can no longer really write the note title exactly as you may want. So in the case I'm creating a note that's like, what is an alias? I can create a question mark in here, but from what I understand, at least from file name structures, like I do run the risk that at some point, if I'm syncing this file somewhere to like a Windows machine, a Linux machine, or who knows what, I could potentially run into an error and I wouldn't even know it. And to me, this is unfortunately this is an unfortunate footgun that exists for people using this, because if you decide you want to get clever with the file names, you just have to hope that at some point that when something syncs, it won't corrupt or whatever, or like when you're transferring things, nothing happens to it. And so, for example, I can't tell you how many times I've looked up in Google, like, what is this a legal character? So for the most part, oh, here's another one that I also want to use constantly is the colon. I want to be able to be like Obsidian, the sequel, right? But look at this. Already, Obsidian is yelling at me because Obsidian is saying these characters are not legal. And so don't get me wrong, there are overlaps, but the fact that I even have to think about what characters are legal to me is a bit of a drawback. So enter the power of aliases. So for those who have followed for a bit, you probably know that, actually, I always start off with that. I need to actually rewire that a bit. Because if you're following this, why would I be repeating this? One of the things I do when it comes to like starting to segment different types of notes, because we've talked about the fact that like notes are great, and if they're flat and they're all kind of like can be put anywhere, this does mean it makes it a little bit trickier for you to be intentional. That was sort of a nice thing about folders, right? To kind of bring back the thread from before, which is that you can say this folder was only for this type of thing, this folder only for this type of thing. But once again, when you think about actually how information exists, it rarely does exist in a perfectly neat little box as a such, right? Does not exist in a vacuum. It often exists across multiple planes, multiple dimensions. So as a result, for example, one of the things I do to make my auto-completing easier is that I'll do the @ symbol to say, oh, I'm going to @ a person. And then this way, I can easily bring it up. And the nice thing is the @ symbol is a legal file name character. But recently on one of the streams, I've been talking about like there are other people who have thought to expand out that character set. So for example, one of the things I've been playing with is adding the plus. And so the plus in this case standing for things that are tech related, most likely apps. So I've been trying that for a little bit and it's nice. My hesitation with it a bit is that I'm really only limited to a certain number of legal characters in my file name before it kind of becomes a bit cumbersome to use prefixes like this, because then I'd have to kind of be afraid of like what happens if it gets inserted the wrong way and how is it actually managed. So this got me thinking like, okay, well, if I were to design a UI system that allowed me to allow people to manage information in Obsidian, right? But rather than having it in an editor mode, again, think of it more like a WYSIWYG. So think Notion where you can just @ something, it'll automatically bring it up, but you're still like kind of in that what you see is what you get form. And what I thought would be nice is that if you could basically, as a user, define that certain prefixes will refer to certain types of notes, and then the app would take care of managing those relationships. So the equivalent of this, for example, is let's say, for example, for sake of argument, that the @ symbol is an illegal character in the file name. So at least when you're in the UI, you could say @ and then we'll just say like John Smith. Well, John Smith might be an @ John Smith in the UI, right? As far as like a reference, but when that software generates the markdown file, right? Because that's what it's responsible for. I would have told the app already that the @ symbol means it's a person. Like it'll always be a person. And so what I envision actually something it would create instead is that the file name that would result instead will be something like this. So if you define what the prefix is, it would then call it append it correctly at the end, because I don't think it necessarily makes sense to do it at the beginning. I think the reason why we prefix it when we're referencing a file name is because we're looking for the ability to quickly narrow down a list of search results. Whereas in this particular case, I think it'd probably make more sense if you were really looking at raw files to look for actually the fact that like you're looking for John Smith first, and then you'll be like, oh, I'm looking for John Smith the person versus John Smith the app. So vice versa, right? If someone decided to say we're creating an app called John Smith, right? Because heck, technology these days, you just don't know what they're gonna name things, and so as a result, the reference file would be John Smith app, right? And this makes it very clean from like if you ever don't have access to your UI editor, at the bare minimum, you have this very consistent nomenclature that you can rely on. So with that thought in mind, though, I was thinking, wait a second, this is actually feasible with what we have right now. It's not perfect, but it is feasible. So what I'm proposing here instead, and to be honest, I think it'll end up helping me with some of the base template creation that I do, is that when you have a file to basically say, okay, going forward, I'm gonna say that anytime that we have a suffix, meaning at the end of a certain type, we would then alias it correctly. So in the case of like, let's say once again, so let's create a name for like a page for bhomes dev. What I actually probably really want to be able to do is that if I opened up this page and it's prefixed with bhome dev, one, it'll delete this and it'll put like person here, append that at the end. Then as an alias, it will go at bhomes. So it'll take the original like name, give it an alias of this symbol, and then from there, I can kind of go about and do the rest of my stuff. And the reason I think this is going to be particularly useful is because if we think of it this way, this alias here is now just a string that's no longer bound to your file name restrictions. So in the event we really want it to be like, I don't know, let's say we want to like use the bust silhouette emoji, right? So now, if I'm not mistaken, let's go in here, let's go back here. So let's say my mouse is acting up. Okay, great. So here, then let's just say I do a bust and silhouette. Check this out. Now I can confidently refer to bhomes. Oh, I realized I totally botched that spelling. Whoops. Okay. I can now refer to bhomes dev completely safe. Like it's completely safe for me to do it this way. And so while not perfect from like I wish my file name could contain everything, this is a real way for us to leverage the power of aliases to start to really expand the way we think about the relationships we have of our notes to the different ideas that we care about. And so, hey, how's it going, Dragon Dust? Good to see you. And so this, to me, this is neat, right? The fact that now we can switch over to that, and it gives kind of like leverage to more programmatic and interesting ideas as far as how things are referenced. And so for me, like the fact that I not only now are limited to the symbols on top of my keyboard, I could even now start aliasing emojis that I think make the most sense to pair things together. That is now available to me. And that I think is pretty darn cool. Okay. So, trying to think. We talked about that. We talked about uses. We talked about aliases. Hey, how's it going, Anna? Good to see you. So let's see. We talked about uses page, really. Then we talked about aliases. So these are the two things we really talked about. And so, yeah, so in the meantime, I think what I want to do next actually is do like sort of a live note idea mapping exercise. Because, again, we're here to just sort of explore Obsidian things. And there's an article I've been really meaning to read that a buddy of mine recommended. And I'd love to kind of go through the process of, one, having the chance to read it, but then on top of that, start discussing some of these ideas with y'all, because I think, as fellow note takers and people looking to explore ideas, this topic probably will resonate with you a bit. And again, we have to get to see how that might necessarily work within the context of Obsidian. All right. So has anyone here heard of a story circle? Because I haven't. This is actually one of the first. Yes, and doing well. Glad to be here in stream with everyone. So, yeah, glad you could join today. Okay, so I don't see any hands up for the story circle. So Dan Harmon, for those who don't know, he's the one who, I believe he's the creator of Rick and Morty. Oh gosh, I'm just gonna look now. I have the internet. I don't like. Let's see. Yes, I am totally right. Dan Harmon did Rick and Morty, and as well. Oh, I did not realize he did Community. Oh, actually, I should have known that. Anyhow. So he is known for something called the story circle, and basically using that to make your story better. And this is really interesting to me because I haven't heard of this one before. As you see, this was published back in August 23rd, 2020. So we're going to take a look at this kind of concept today and just think about, like, hopefully this can serve as a nice little, I think, use case of how, I guess, or not a use case, a case study of how I might take an article like this and ingest it into my own brain so that I can refer to it later on. So I believe actually I already made a reference to this. Did I not? Oh no. I mean, if not, I mean, all the more reason why. Oh, Dan Harmon's Story Circle. See, this is probably totally not. I guess, you know what? I was referring to the technique, but clearly, all right, so here we go. So this is the resources, some of the resources that are related to this. So again, here it was recommended by one of my actually co-organizers at VDC, an old coworker and longtime friend, Chris Guerreri. So he basically recommended this. So actually, you know what? I will say this. For those who are like, if you're taking a break from work and you're like, I'd love to actually like read this and kind of do this alongside, this is the actual article we'll be looking at. So feel free to take that and bookmark it yourself for the future. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Okay. So let me do resources. So I'm going to drop this in here. So I try to remember for my show notes in the future. But yeah, let's take a look at some of the ideas in this. Okay, so taking a look at this. Oh, okay, so very interesting. At the very beginning, they refer to a technique that I am familiar with, which is Campbell's hero's journey. And this is a writing technique that is actually really popular. In fact, I've never even taken a note on it. So I'm actually just going to quickly jot it down. And so basically here, it refers to this, call it cliche path of storytelling, where basically, as we can see here, I'm just going to take some notes on it because, again, by writing this down, it's going to solidify a bit more to me. There's a call to adventure, right? Something happens to the main character early on. And then usually there's some sort of supernatural aid. So again, for sake of not ruining any spoilers, even for stuff like Star Wars or Harry Potter, right? There's usually something that comes in to make this person embark on this adventure, right? And then along the way, they usually meet some sort of threshold where they meet a guardian, right? Some sort of mentor. So Star Wars, there was Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then again Harry Potter. I mean, you could argue like Hagrid was kind of like the early mentor, Dumbledore, that kind of thing. And then at this point, this is where like the beginning of the transformation occurs, and then mentor helpers come along. There's a sort of like challenges and temptations, so those are very common. And then there's usually some sort of big revelation, right? That's like the climax. And then they have that transformation where they suddenly become the hero. And, sometimes there's like an atonement piece. They return back to, their original, story. And then that's like kind of like the whole cycle here. So if you didn't know, that is the hero's journey, and very common sort of like trope inside of storytelling. And so interestingly enough, so this is very cool. So apparently it was really based on this idea. So I would say this, I can say, so I'm gonna refer to Dan Harmon because this is the person, and Dan Harmon based this concept around Campbell's hero's journey. Okay, great. And then let's take a look at how, okay, there's a video to explain. I'm not gonna do the video because obviously that I'm not just gonna watch something on mute with y'all. And so, okay, interesting. So there is a theory here with storytelling that talks about two universal languages. The one that math and story. That's kind of interesting because I have heard the universal language for math before, in that, no matter what part of the country you go to, like math is one of those things that everyone has basically agreed upon as universal principles, and that there is a common language to be told even if you can't speak or write the other person's native tongue. On the other hand, I like how they're kind of talking about this idea of story as the other universal language, because if we think about ideas and information, really it's the stories that allow us to communicate and convey emotions and bring life to something. And so don't get me wrong, I would say that if someone were reading a story that they didn't understand the native tongue, then it basically is useless. But I would say storytelling, on the other hand, as far as like, if we think back to the days where we had orators and actual bards who would spin tales of, adventure and glory to us, like while we sat around the campfire, because, print was too expensive back then. Like, even if you didn't understand like what they were saying, you could, the ideas could be conveyed to you. You could feel that emotion, right? Like, I think enough of us here also probably have watched other types of storytelling that really do happen in another language. So for me, for example, the perfect example is anime. Anime is spoken in Japanese. I am starting to learn it, but I definitely don't understand it. Yet, if you have me watch anime without a single line of English subtitles, I probably would be able to actually grasp a lot of what's happening around me. I might lack some of the nuances that come with that information and like how deep the story goes as far as maybe some philosophical explorations, but the story would be universal and I could those emotions. And so, maybe someone might say, based on what I say, emotions are more the universal thing. But I like this idea of story because there's movement, right? Emotions are sort of fixed points. And I would argue, for the sake of philosophical debate, that emotions also are a bit tricky because it is up to the interpretation of a culture. Whereas, I would say stories probably have a more universal shared history. Anyhow, that's like a little rant there. Okay, so if that's said, we talk about the Dan Harmon story circle. All right, here we go. So one of the things, let's see, actually Dan Harmon, what I'm going to do really quick is I learned something about Dan Harmon that I want to note is that Dan Harmon is related to Community, the TV show, as well as Rick and Morty. I'm gonna do TV show. So you can see I was actually experimenting with this parentheses thing a little while ago, but I think I'm really gonna start keeping it around. So here we go. So connected to these two things, I just want to know that relationship exists. And so interesting. So Dan Harmon is saying that story structure is divided into 8 parts of a protagonist's story. And so also calling the story embryo or plot embryo, these 8 steps follow characters' pursuit of a goal outside their normal world. Their inevitable return finds them changed whether or not they achieve their goal. Okay, so this is one of those things where while sometimes it's worth paraphrasing, I'm not even going to bother for this one. This one I think works well as a quote. And so I might pull some stuff out later here, but this is very interesting. And so, yeah, let's take a look at this. So the 8 steps in the Dan Harmon story circle. So you know what I'm going to do? Actually, I've been actually thinking more about my headers in Obsidian. And I think I'm just going to do like an about section. But then after that, I'm going to utilize more stuff. So let's start with the question. What is the story circle? Okay. And then here, what are I'll say the 8 steps in a story circle. Okay, so you need go, search, find, take, return, change. Okay, this sounds quite familiar with the hero journey we just talked about, but I do like the fact that it's a little bit more segmented into changes. Ooh, great. We have a question here from Dragon Dust. So, been using Obsidian for 2 to 3 weeks now, but still not sure whether to use only links or a combination of links and hashtags. Okay, so this is this plays perfectly well into the scenario that we're in right now. So, one of the things, as Dragon Dust notes, is that my workflow has changed between notes because one of the things about Obsidian, and sort of call it like organic, I would call it organic thinking and note taking, is that you want your ideas to start to change over time. Or I don't know about want to, but like just because it changed is not inherently a bad thing. Especially if you come from a developer world where everything's usually very standardized. I would say as you refine your techniques, eventually things start to become more standard. But as I frequently do, I experiment and test things out. Sometimes things go a little bit haywire. But as a result, what I do is I consider those notes that call it aren't formatted the exact way I would want to right now. I would call those notes in an incubation stage. Because what's ultimately happening is that note in that time period when I wrote it meant those things to me. In the event that I come back to something in the future, right, then, and like, let's say I come back to that note. So for example, even the Campbell's Hero's Journey, right? Here is actually a great example of like, there is a backlink that's mentioned here. So it's brought back to the story circle. But really, if I want to think about it this way, it's actually it refers to other things that I probably want to take note of. So here's where I might drop my back matter, where if I'm trying to categorize the metadata, I kind of use a little bit of inspiration. And so in this particular case, date, rating, instrument, series duration, these are all irrelevant. So attributes doesn't matter. So here is where I would say this is a type. I'll call it a type concept. I'm still debating how to call this, but so to Dragon Dust's question regarding tags versus links, when I think you have something that applies to a broad spectrum, right? Like if we're talking about programming and you have specific classes, right? Like this is an animal, this is a person. I do find that when you know for a fact this note at least feels to you like a specific thing. So to give you an example, right? All the different types that some of the different types that I have is that if it's a book, it's a type book. And that way I can easily query against all of my book notes. And then, so again, I'm playing around with different ones. So ignore things like ref, but like, even like, for example, here's a great example of something that I've been debating with too. Type blog. And actually, if I'm being more accurate, it really meant to say type blog post. What I found with type blog post is it's a little bit too limiting. And this is call it the drawback of tags, is because once you kind of in a system, it can kind of keep, well, no, okay, I take back what I say about tags. The reason why I say that is because, okay, let's say blog, right? Blog doesn't make sense anymore. In fact, I really need to make sure it actually says blog post. So what I would typically do then is I can come into type, I can go into blog, oh wait, whoa, too much stuff. People, book. Can I organize by alpha? Type, book, refs, course, app, gear. This is not alphabetical because it's by the number of things referenced in it. Oh, here you go. Type blog. Here we go. So I can rename this, for example, to say type blog post. And that'll go through and update everything, which is nice. But in this particular case, I would say all my blog posts actually need to be replaced with two things, because I'm a really big fan of composing things together so that they're easily searchable across multiple things. Because you can imagine if I'm doing a content dashboard for blog posts I've written, but videos I've created, I could technically create lists of like type blog post, type video, type this. But at least for my context, it actually makes more sense for it to be type content, because this is the content that I'm developing. And this is what I was referring to in terms of like workflows and refinement, is once you have enough data points to reflect the things you need, it becomes that much easier to say, oh, you know what? It doesn't really make sense anymore for me to say like type blog post, type video, type this. Because what I learned, for example, if you're wondering and you're in a similar boat for content creation, is that when you say type blog post, right? This is great if you actually like the whole note is dedicated to that blog post. But then I'm going to ask you, what happens if you're turning that blog post into a talk? I guess you could create a new note that refers to the same file and then put like a parentheses that says this topic is for the talk specifically. But again, to me then, what really is that you have content, and then you can also, then by splitting out the content, you have the ability, for me at least, I would say that this content has multiple formats. I've written it as a blog post, and I've written it like I've done a video on it, right? I've done a YouTube video on it. And then this allows me to query it accordingly, and you can always split up things, but this makes the content sit better across multiple streams of thoughts. And this, I think, goes back to that thread we were referring to earlier regarding this discussion around directories. Because it's funny, when you think about it, right? A lot of us who have used computers for a while are probably used to the idea of folders. But if you actually think of the internet as a whole, think of something like Netflix. When you're browsing videos, videos don't sit in folders. They sit in categories, and they sit in multiple categories. And so when someone's browsing, they might have a category of recently watched, but the recently watched is not a folder of recently watched. It's a query of what is recently watched. And I think this kind of thinking, at least for me, is a bit of that light bulb of why the new wave of note-taking is coming through. Because here we have really this concept of like, maybe directories aren't actually a really good thing, right? And I just like, I'll mention a little bit, but that's why in coding, for one of my workshops, we talk about architecture, and I actually I encourage against heavily nested folder directories for applications, because oftentimes they only benefit the person who created it, and then after that, like starts to have diminishing returns the longer as time goes on and the person inherits the code base. They have less and less context for why those folders were created, and then eventually they either get completely lost or they get left alone and considered legacy, and someone starts something completely brand new. All right, Chris, thanks for hanging out. So Dragon Nuts here, exactly. Currently I have different folders with the same name note and linking to each other. Yeah, so that's exactly it. And one of the things I'm trying to do right now with basically my experimentation is all of my notes live really. It looks like I have a bunch of different folders, but my notes basically get created in this Zettelkasten folder. And basically, which for those who don't know, it's short for notebox. And by keeping everything in one folder, it lets me keep, rather than refer to the same file in different folders, I can refer to the same file, and then I can always update the context accordingly. So what I do here, so I mean, Dragon Dust, if you have a scenario, for example, I'd be happy to sort of role play the way I'm thinking about it. But in terms of like stuff like I said, like the blog post, I actually don't even bother creating a folder for blog posts, or I wouldn't create a folder for the content I'm creating. My goal is to allow ideas to flourish naturally. And then as I'm sure that like this note is dedicated to a specific idea, then that is when I start to use tags, because I'm trying to say, okay, odds are if I'm going to like, if I want to query for something specific, like a property of this note, I will try to rely on tags, especially if it's like something that's shared, right? I think the benefit of tags is that you have this shared hierarchy and class system that you've personally like created that makes sense to you. And so in this regard, we have, again, I'm trying to see. So type. So yeah. So at one point, for example, I had different modes for how I was like doing work, right? It was like the airplane researcher thing. And that's when I would tag it, because I would go, show me all the things that were tagged with mode airplane, mode researcher, that kind of thing. And so, we have a question here from Cassidy. Do you have a quotes template that you like? I've been just using quotes and it's not great for discoverability. Yes, this is a great question. So, quotes. How do I deal with quotes? So currently I have a type. Actually, you know what? So it's funny. I've actually more or less stopped using the search bar because I'm so used to using data view for all this stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this real quick, split this up, and then in here I'll do the preview mode. And here let's do the DV list from type quote. Okay, great. So what I have done at this point is my template, again, see, as you can see, I have played around with this a lot, but I think I settled on something that I'm actually pretty happy with. So here's a quote that actually comes from the Daily Note, which is, and I'm going to read it because it was meaningful to me and hopefully it'll be meaningful to you, which is, meaning is something you build into your own life. You build it out of your own past, out of affections and your loyalties, out of the experience of humankind as it is passed on to you. You are the only person who can put them together into that unique pattern that will be your life. And this is by John Gardner. And so what I've kind of decided, at least for now, is basically the way I name the quote whatever I like in the moment, what's most meaningful to me as far as like how I might look for it later. But then I always add the person actually at the end of it, because I'm hoping that as I get more familiarity, I'll be like, oh, I'm looking for that quote by this person. And so if John Gardner is already in my search, then guess what? John Gardner appears with that quote. Now, actually, I've realized though, I'm gonna do this and then I'm gonna do this. This is actually probably my ideal workflow at this point. And the reason why is because at least I have a vision that there will come a point where you can basically start to tell your application, whether it's Obsidian or something else, that based on this suffix, this prefix, I want you to do something special with it. Because, for example, one of the things that I found that challenging at this point, one of the challenges with Obsidian is that while, for example, you'll notice I tried to create a classification of, for example, this is a type of note. This is an origin from this particular day. Like this is when I discovered it. It's hard because when I make an update to, let's say like in this schema, I decide that quotes really deserve to have like, so for example, I have a creator, property. Well, the problem now is that while I have this creator property as far as like who is the original author, right? And this point is John Gardner. The problem is that this doesn't populate to the rest of my quotes. And so I don't know, I've been thinking about this. I don't know if I have an answer to this yet. I don't know if it makes more sense for Obsidian to have a plugin where, call it, if you assign, if you tell the plugin that certain nodes need to have a certain schema, and you can define that in a central location, that when you make an update to one place, it updates everywhere. So a small example of this, for example, is you'll notice that I had to append the double colon to get the inline field for querying later on. It'd be nice if I didn't have to do a search and replace to do all that later. I like to say that, like, look, you know that this file is type quote. These are the properties to keep track of. Please do that for me. I don't think there's anything programmatically stopping us from being able to do that, but there may be some complexities for making that, like, call it easy to implement. And so as far as discoverability goes, though, actually to Cassidy's point, is what do you do then regarding this? Well, sometimes I think what I want to do is, because if I'm going to include this block, right, inside of like a quote, then, okay, let's say that in here in session 12, I want to actually embed said quote. So I'm going to delete all this. So I would say like this, embed meaning is something you build with your own life. Great. And so a couple of problems, right? One, you'll see, oh, there's so much here. This is too much. I just wanted the quote. So what we can do is we can do the caret here, and we can put that quote together, and it looks like it actually did do what I wanted it to. Yes. Okay. I was a little afraid that the block level would separate out the two quotes. And this is great, because this is what I want. I want to be able to include just the quote. Everything else is secondary, which means now you can tag certain other things. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky, right? Because this is actually a great example which even connects to Dragon Dust's question, in that quotes there are different types of quotes that mean different things to different people. And so in this particular case, what I used to do, as you can even see here with quote, I tried to add another level of nesting. So I would go inspirational, for example, and that works great if you only ever have that one piece. Like, don't get me wrong, you could always go type quote, this is about, like I don't know, meaning or whatever, like personal journey. You can have like a bunch of this quote stuff, but I find that this is kind of limiting, because what happens when you have other things related to inspirational things, personal journeys, but they're not quotes? Now you're bound by, like, you kind of have this, I would call it artificial separation of concerns, when really they deserve to overlap. And so it's for that reason why lately with quotes, I actually stay to, again, it's technically two levels because you have type quote, but it's, to me, it's one level deep, because once you set the type, then that's like your changed value is here. The type has a very fixed meaning for me. But in this case, maybe instead, what I might want to do instead is, like, maybe it makes more sense to have like, like, I don't know, let me see, speech bubble, maybe like topics. And so here is where Dragon Dust's question comes into play for the tags versus links bit. Because at this point, you have a choice. We could go topics inspirational, and you can go topics, like personal journey. This actually isn't bad. This is actually quite nice, because this means that if you have other blog posts that are basically an inspirational topic, like, now you'll have linking, so that when you're looking for topics that are inspirational, they not only exist across your quotes, they exist across your blog posts, your videos, the references, the recommendations from friends. And this topics tag, which I've played around with some, is a nice way of merging and, like, having that not cross-platform. Anyways, cross-informational awareness. Caveat. The problem with tags, though, is that this means that it's a little bit weird sometimes when you want to, like, really leverage the relationship of, call it, backlinking and forward linking. And so I would say that my rule of thumb at this point for tags to links is when a topic becomes super personal to you, and you want to really dive deep into it, and you want that, call it, level of insight where it's now, like, starting to occur naturally inside of your search results. So what do I mean by that? Remember, we talked about the fact that when you do a link in Obsidian, so for example, if right now I create a new note called meaning, right? And that's all it's called. So let me create, let me split this and let me create a brand new note called meaning. And let's say like I'm doing a philosophical exploration on what meaning is and like, you know, philosophical journey. The thing with this is, in case for those who didn't know, it's actually going to be doing a bunch of backlinking to everything that has ever mentioned meaning. And so you can see here that, you know, staying connected to meaning in your work, right? And, you know, so there is actually a lot in here that is yet to be explored because there's unlinked stuff. When you get to this point, this is where you, by using links, you unlock this piece. And so somewhere in here, I imagine, is meaning from this quote, right? Meaning from John Gardner. And so the nice thing about using a link to do meaning is that if I do it like this, all of a sudden, oh, actually, yeah, all of a sudden now you'll see it's actually a link to mention. And so it's one of those things where there's no 100% of the way to do it right, because if you link everything and you have no idea what your links are doing, it will become a cluttered mess. And that's where I think that's where the tags are very, very useful, because it is something you've defined in advance and you've said this means something to me. And again, there's all this tag pane right here that, if you, depending on how you architect it, can actually provide you some sort of good, like, sort of thought regarding, like, okay, like, you know, I have format, I have, you know, like, for example, Rust as a root tag doesn't make any sense. It should probably be like topic Rust for that instance. It doesn't make sense for this to be here. So heck, I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now. So I'll say topic Rust. But an example of where Rust, where I actually did this is, I had a topic for Golang for actually quite a while. And Golang was like, it was always topic Golang. In fact, I can just pull up, let me just pull up any of my Golang types, for example, right? So, you know, Boolean, string, whatever. And so you'll notice here that when this was actually supposed to be topics. See, again, one of those things where, like, I wish I had a thing. This used to be topic Golang. But my study of the language has become enough of a part of what I do that I actually want the ability that if I'm writing an article, a blog post, and I mention Golang, I actually want that relationship to show up. I don't want to have to manually tag it every time. And so when you're looking for that automatic relationship, sort of like, or spontaneous discovery, when you're ready for that, I think that's when you graduate it to a link. And I think that is the big differentiation between topics tags to links, is that links is very free flowing. And there's this sense of like infinite possibilities. But when your brain isn't ready to handle that level of scale yet, tags serve a great fix. Like, okay, so I remember, do I have a topic in here? Maybe about like psychology or something that I did before, because like, I think, you know what? And like, oh, this is about death and this is about, maybe ukulele. Like, and so it lets your brain start to percolate and sort of marinate with those concepts and get familiar with them, which I think is very valuable, because then once they become ingrained in you, then it's like, okay, time to graduate things from tag to an actual internal link. So I went on a bit of a rant. Cassie, let me know if that helps at all. And so I see that Dragon Dust had an additional clarification, which is super helpful. So for example, this is from Dragon Dust. I have a note about an app describing the app and the App Store link and stuff like that. But how would you do it when you do a YouTube video or a blog post on the same app? Oh, this is a great question. Oh, I love this. Okay. So let's give myself a real world example. So right now, for example, I am exploring the use of something called Raycast. So if you see that if I hit Command Space, it basically is like a launcher for different applications. So this looks very similar to Mission Control in the Mac OS native, and I think Windows has their equivalent. But Raycast is very cool because not only does it allow you to do things like commands and scripts, but like you can do things like file search. So I can specifically search within files within my directory, and like it's just really powerful from like, you know, show my desktop, and you can write different scripts for it. So Raycast has been quite cool. And so how would we do that? Well, so right now I actually have a Raycast. Oh, do I have the Raycast as? Okay, here you guys look. So I have Raycast, the app right here. And so actually, since it's an app, I'm going to go ahead and prefix it with the plus symbol because that's what I'm using to define tech right now. So, okay, here's Raycast the app. And so what I can do here is, similar to you, I'm actually going to follow what you talked about. So if I'm learning about Raycast, for example, I'm going to say, well, what do I know about Raycast? Well, I can tell you that it's definitely related to productivity. So, productivity. And then I would probably say like, okay, what do I need to know about it? Here's some resources on the Raycast. But then I'm going to add a little bit of back matter to this because I actually do have some context that I can provide myself as far as what it's about. So again, I don't really care about the date. I guess I can rate it right now. I would say it's like a 4.5 out of 5 so far. And then duration's not relevant. I would probably say, so type app, which is fine. Priority mode, format, not relevant. Area, genre, not areas. I would say actually, this is where I'm still like, again, this is why you want to explore with things, right? Area of productivity. I think I'm going to do that. Maybe, you know what? No, I'm going to area tools. I think I'm going to do that. Okay. Team status. Status is currently actually in use. So I'll call this status active because it's actually something I'm using. Not for any specific team platform. Topics. So again, I already have the topics embedded up top. So I'm actually going to delete that. But who was it recommended by? This was actually recommended by Daniel Rowe from the Nux team. He's the one who really turned me onto it. And but I actually have to credit coworker Phil for actually also kind of helping to push me over the line to get it to work. So this is great. All right. That said, I can close. Yeah, I'm just going to delete this. I learned that if I don't clean up the metadata right now, I will never clean it up. Okay, so there you go. Now we have like a rough what's important to me, great resources. Now, the question here is if I want to create a video on Raycast, right? So what I would probably do is I would create a new note and I would go, okay, so I'm going to say like my exploration or my time with Raycast. Okay, so then when I'm in here, what I'd actually do is I'm actually just going to link Raycast directly here in the title because I actually try my best to actually reuse the content that's already inside of what I'm writing to do some of those links so that, again, basically here, to be honest, you could probably argue, what if you don't want the plus? Then that, I would say that is a fair point. So I'm just going to add another alias for just it by itself. And so now I can do that as another alias. So Raycast here. Yep. So Raycast here will refer to Raycast the app. And I say that because what if there's a video game called Raycast, right? One could totally see a video game. I could totally see a video game called Raycast. And so I would say, okay, my time with Raycast. And then basically I would just go from here. And I would say basically like, similar to Alfred. And so Alfred the app, there we go. Great. This is the right link. But more nuanced in its ability for plugins, and the file search works better than Alfred, right? And so if you're wondering though, Alfred here doesn't really need to be linked twice. It doesn't do, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't do any additional searching for that. This line will still be queried with Alfred app. Don't get me wrong, if you do it on another line, then that's a new block, and then there might be... I just try to internal link wherever I can as a way of actually practicing that habit. But then more importantly here, I just realized this is a content idea that I haven't really fleshed out. So I'm going to drop in my page template for this real quick. And so let me go ahead and delete this front matter that's not relevant. And so the date, the rating, the instrument, series, duration, not relevant right now. So as you can see here, this is a type content. This, I'm going to say format blog. This is a blog post that's going to eventually happen. Mode's not necessary. Priority, I've been weighing that whether or not I want to keep ranking priority in inline fields or not. Genre, not really. So this infects the area. Once again, see, I think I do like area productivity because it affects the area of my life that deals with productivity and workflows. Maybe I call it workflows. I don't know. See, but this is the other thing though. Tags, you can't aliasing. So you can't be like productivity means workflows. This means efficiency. Can't do it. So again, maybe it's time to graduate to a link. Who knows? All right. So the team. Okay. So let's say, okay. So in this particular case, I'll be writing this one for myself. So team Ben Kozen. Status, idea, great, platform topics. Wunderbar. And then creator, publisher, not relevant, estimated date. Yeah, okay. I'm just going to wipe this out for now. And then there you go. That's how I would link it. And then basically, like, if I figured out tips, right? Like, let's say I'm in my, so let's say we're in our Obsidian Office Hours here, and someone in the stream recommends like, oh, there's this great tip. You should look into scripting, automatically generating, date timestamps with natural language parsing in Raycast. Then I would just come in here and I'll just be like, well, let's see. So in Raycast, I'm gonna go ahead and say, look into what was it? We said whatever, date time parsing. This is an example. And so now we have 3 different notes that are referencing Raycast. And so when I go ahead and let me close this and open up the graph to the right, you'll see, look at this. This is how many times Raycast, the app, has been referred to across my notes. And so you can see it's made some organic connections to different people. Who is basically like, so you see these are the recommended. You can see this is where, when I talked with Phil on July 27th, this is actually where Raycast got brought up. And then as we can see, we talked about Raycast today in the app. Productivity is related to Raycast as well as in these co-working sessions. So funny enough, I guess I got introduced to it back in June. So this is where Daniel first recommended, talk to me about Raycast. And then here's my blog post for Time with Raycast. And so, and then the great thing about this graph is that I've seen some really beautiful implementations of this. But like, let's say you're like, I'd like to make this a little bit more visual. Well, you could say, well, anything that's typed content, I'm going to make all the content that's related to, I'm going to make it red. And so you'll see here that, look, so Raycast now is associated with both these 2 red dots. And I think that's really nice from like a visualization perspective, because then I can basically be like, okay, when it was an event, what was that like? And I'll make this one green for the sake of argument. So there we go. So these were events that Raycast were mentioned on. And so, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Dragon Dust. That was awesome. And now you've added a little Raycast blog post into my, my note queue. So this is great. All right. So here from Anna Codes, I have a very free form, 1 level of tagging, which is nice for giving note diff of ideas, but finding it a mess for discovery. Yeah. So Anna, that is the tricky part with tags ultimately, which is why I think I started doing let's see, hold up. Why isn't, okay, there it is. Okay. So from learned experience, or from not even learned, from my experience, tags, when you're doing it, or like call it organically. So if I write a new note, once again, like, okay, let's say delete this note, because I'll just make sure to delete it later. If I'm like, oh yeah, this is my idea, and then like topic productivity, and mentions the topic of Golang, right? This kind of works, but I found that this, again, it does get kind of messy, because if you're like, okay, well, at the bare minimum, what if I like say, I'm not going to put tags in the middle of my sentence because that reads funny. So I would say topic productivity here, and then this makes more sense, topic Golang. But then for whatever reason, let's just say you have a reason to say, okay, I'll have my topic productivity and topic Golang here. I found that this became very hard to manage, and I kept forgetting things. So that is the reason why I was inspired to come up with a back matter manifest, because what I wanted it to do was basically remind me what properties I cared about and what I found useful to my brain. And I think that's, I think I tried to mention this in the title of this particular stream, but it really, or maybe I wrote it in the description. I don't remember. But what I will say is that if we're about trying to make ourselves like not even more efficient for the sake of productivity, because I'll be honest, one of the things that's been mulling in my mind a lot is this idea of, I'm going to call it toxic productivity. Like there is almost like an and understandably we know why this exists, but like there's like an obsession with everything being about like being more efficient and effective. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, except I feel like the problem is we forgot why we're doing those things. And it's almost as if we're trying to make ourselves like into machines that we every time we perfect input have perfect output. And I think there is a disconnect, and that's honestly, I won't get into that. That's a whole nother philosophical rant for another time. But as far as like Obsidian, and we're talking about tags and linking and stuff, if we're really trying to treat Obsidian and our notes, because that's what it is, if it's our second brain, then we're looking to talk about a personalized search engine. And so just like you would expect over time certain things to have value. So for example, Google, one of the things they value in like search results is like how many times your page is linked to, how many times your page is clicked on, right? So vice versa, back into your own search engine, what do you care about? And so, for example, like, if it's a book, do you care about how much you like the book? Do you want to rate it on a scale of 10? And, for content, I ended up creating this metadata called series because I needed an easy way to go, all of these blog posts belong to this series. And the easiest way for me to do that was to remind myself that there's a metadata called series, and that's what will link everything together. And then, and I think actually I realized, I'm just going to add it here because I totally forgot. But I think I'm going to put a number here. Maybe I'll just put the number 1. And then I'll just be like number, for example. Because if it's a series, I learned from experience that just because you have a series, like unless you name your files a certain way, some of them are like, it's like the first post in the series, second post in the series. And so one way for me to order that was actually to have a property in here by like the number of the series. And so you can remove line 9 from your manifest. Hey, Dragon Dust, way to go for the save. Yes, you're totally right. That explains the double entry that I was getting. And so as a quick explainer, I realize we're at time, so I'm going to start wrapping up. But what you might have noticed here is that I've started abstracting out some of the metadata so that it can be reused in other ways. So for instance, right, if we look at the date attribute template, you'll see here that it actually just includes basically like the emoji with the property name and then the double colon with the space. And the reason this is nice is because sometimes or not even sometimes, the back matter can be not even a little, can be a lot of overwhelming sometimes. If I'm taking a quick note, so let's say like, I don't know, like delete this music album, right? That's what we're gonna open this one. If I'm really in a kind of a go-to and I'm really just trying to flow through and throw ideas down, I might be like, here's my thoughts on this music album. But what I quickly want to do is, let me insert the date so I realized that was probably too fast for you to see. So what I'm doing here is I'm going, okay, I'm going to create a list. I'm going to insert an attribute, right? And so at this point, I only have a couple one. So I'll have ratings. And so it looks like actually based on the auto list complete, I actually need to delete the list property so that it doesn't automatically do it, because this will be annoying for me to have to delete every time. But I can be like, oh, this music album was a 5 out of 5, like loved it. And then, okay. And then duration, right? This album was 93 minutes long. And so I wanted that flexibility to organically compose my metadata in a time where I didn't want to have to go through a manifest. Because really the point of my back matter manifest is to just remind me of all the various properties that I felt were important at some point. And so it kind of gives me some sort of like reminder. So anyhow, all right. Well, this has been an absolute blast. I always, again, love the questions y'all bring. And honestly, going forward, I would say, again, similar to how Dragon Dust did, and absolutely love that. If you have an example where you're like, this is how I'm using it, I'm not sure, like, or how would you do it? I love solving those problems and just trying to see, like, because to me, it allows me to test whether or not my theory has any merit. And I think I talked a little bit about this on Tuesday, but honestly, the last thing I want to be in life is I want to, like, the minimum time I can be wrong about something, the better. So if I discover my methodology is wrong, I'd happily fail in public and learn and show you all that to be like, you found an edge case in what I was originally thinking. Like, I love that because it means my techniques will get even better, and then y'all can learn from my mistakes. So again, growth mindset for those of us who also follow that. All right. Well, with that wraps up another episode or session of Obsidian Office Hours. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take a look and see who is streaming. If my hope is correct, I believe. Oh yes, I do see the great. Oh, the Casadoo just started. So we're gonna head on over there, and we're gonna join her for her stream. So once again, thanks everyone for joining. And I'll see. Oh wait, as far as I gotta remember, Jason's really good at this. All right. So as far as the schedule for next week, basically we have next Tuesday we have Build with Ben, and on Thursday we have another Obsidian Office Hours. So to check basically the schedule, go to benkozen.io/schedule, which I will drop. And I realize some of these links are out of date, but I'm working on automating it. So all in due time. So thanks again, once again, everyone for joining. It's been a lot of fun.